Okay, guys, welcome back. We are on week 2 of our Pathways class. This week, we are going to be talking about the green and kitchen witch pathways. Let's go ahead and dig in here. The green witch pathway. First of all, most green witches tend to work really closely with nature. A lot of times, these witches are what we would call a wild crafter, an herbalist. Sometimes they're a gardener. They just feel very connected to plants, flowers, trees, nature as a whole. That's just kind of where they thrive, their safe place. Most green witches, and not all, but most green witches tend to be solitary. You do not have to be solitary to be a green witch, but that tends to be the case. Also, this is a pathway that is very highly individualized, okay? And the reason for that is that all of us live in different climates, different seasons at any given time of the year. So the practices, what you can practice in the area around you, in nature, in forest, or whatever's around you, that's going to heavily depend on the weather, what climate you're in, etc. Not everyone is going to be able to use the same plants or to use the same plants at the same time of year. That's going to vary a lot. Green witches also tend to be kind of a protector of nature. A lot of these people really push for using renewable resources, recycling, kind of minimizing your carbon footprint, that type of thing. Green witches really have a deep respect for nature, and most witches do, but this is in a much deeper sense. They feel very, very connected there. And sometimes when they hear of someone being disrespectful to nature, that's something they take very personally. They might get very defensive about that, and that's just part of their pathway. They also tend to learn and use the spiritual, magical, and medicinal properties of plants and herbs. And not every pathway will do that. Again, just like how not every pathway uses crystals or tarot, not every pathway has to use plants and herbs in their practice. It's whatever you choose. But green witches do tend to use them. Let's talk about some misconceptions of the green pathway. Some people think that you have to live in the country, on a farm, out in the woods to be a green witch. This is not true. You can live right in the center of New York City and still be a green witch. Plants are everywhere. Herbs are everywhere. And there's always a way to connect with nature no matter where you are. So you do not have to live in the country. Sometimes people think that green witches are just living alongside as many houseplants as they can cram into their home. That's also not true. Some green witches actually don't really have a green thumb. Maybe they don't do very well with raising plants. Maybe that's something they really struggle with, but that doesn't take away their appreciation of nature and their connection to it. It just means that that's something they kind of struggle with, and that's okay. And also, as we mentioned in our first class, you do not have to have green witch blood in your bloodline. Okay, you don't have to be a descendant from another green witch. It is always helpful because you'll have somebody that came before you that can help you, but that doesn't always have to be the case. You can start right now if you're drawn to the green witch pathway. You don't have to have anyone before you that did. Okay, let's talk about the kitchen pathway. And kitchen witches, this is primarily where I put myself, just because this is one of my personal practices, what I've worked into my craft on my own. We emphasize the strength and power of cooking, food, and meals into our practice. Most kitchen witches have a very deep knowledge and understanding of the power of herbs and spices, not only magically, but also medicinally. And we use those things in our meals, in our medicines that we might make. It's just very, very sacred to us. The whole kitchen becomes a sacred space for kitchen witches. A lot of the times, that's where we practice most of our magic. There might be an altar in the kitchen. One thing I wanted to mention, and the reason I chose these two pathways to start out with, is that I wanted to point out that two different pathways, and even more, can always overlap. Because if you remember, we were talking about how the green witch has a very deep knowledge of how to use herbs, plants. Kitchen witches are the same way. They tend to have the same understanding. The difference is that green witches tend to practice in nature. Nature is their sacred space. Some green witches might even have an outdoor altar, whereas the kitchen witch focuses in the kitchen. That is their sacred space. That might be where you find their altar. Just two different sacred spaces, and that's kind of what makes the biggest difference for me. But green witches feel a little bit more protective over nature, a little bit more connected, whereas kitchen witches just happen to know how to use it in their craft. Okay, let's talk about some misconceptions for the kitchen pathway. Kitchen witches do not have to be great cooks. You may not get a gourmet meal, 3 times a day on the table from a kitchen witch. That just because they're a kitchen witch, that doesn't mean that they're a fantastic cook. Frankly, they could be terrible and still practice their magic there. And they're not always in the kitchen. They only practice their magic there. And sometimes that magic may move to a different place. It doesn't have to stay there. That's just their sacred space. And not every meal is magical. My daughter had a bowl of cereal this morning. There wasn't any magic in that. Okay? That was just me not in the mood to cook something. It doesn't have to be magic every single time. Okay? So let's talk about your homework questions. What is one thing that surprised you about the green or the kitchen witch pathway? I know that for me, there's always surprises with these pathways because I always have some sort of conception of what this is going to be like. And inevitably, every time I learn about one of them, because I'm always learning, there's always something I didn't expect. So what did you not expect? Number 2, were any of the misconceptions surprising to you? I think that the number one misconception that people tend to have that might be surprising is that kitchen witches are good cooks. Most people just think that they are inherently good cooks, and that's just not the case. So that's one that I think other people probably find surprising. And number 3, do you feel that you might follow either one of these pathways? Why is that? Or why not? What did or did not resonate with you? I want to hear about that. Okay, so I know this was a quick class, guys. Moving forward with these pathway classes, this is kind of what you can expect. We're going to get through them quickly with minimal material, a very light course load. Okay, I just want to make sure you get an overview, and this will help you ultimately choose your own path. All right, well, until next week, you all have a good one. Bye.